To some of you who are really, really observant and were here last week, you will say, Pastor, didn't we just have a teaching on this? Mark chapter 5, verse 25. And the answer to that is, well, we looked at part of it, and we're going to look at the other part now. So Mark chapter 5, verse 21. Mark 5, verse 21. When Jesus had crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with them. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came, and fear fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Okay, we're going to look at the woman this time. We looked at Jairus last time.
Yeah.
Now, having an issue of blood for 12 years has got to be really, really hard on her physically. And it became very, very hard on her economically, because if you look at verse 26, she suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. We were just talking about doctors. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. So she's suffering physically. She's probably in poverty. But more than that, she was suffering emotionally and socially. Because the Jewish society at that time had a teaching that if any woman had an issue of blood, referring to her period, she would be unclean for the amount of time that the blood was coming out. You go to Leviticus chapter 15. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19. Leviticus is way in the front of the book. Leviticus 15, verse 19. This is written 1,500 years before this woman had her problem. So it's part of their society. It's part of their tradition. It's part of their community. It's not to be changed. So in chapter 15, verse 19, it says, "When a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days. And anyone touches her will be unclean till evening. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean. Anything she sits on will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Whoever touches anything she sits on must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he'll be unclean till evening. Whether it's the bed or anything she was sitting on, when anyone touches it, he will be unclean till evening. If a man lies with her, and her monthly flow touches him, he will be unclean for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will be unclean. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time, other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as is her bed during her monthly period. Anything she sits on will be unclean, as during her period. Whoever touches them will be unclean. He must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will be unclean till evening. What's the word that just keeps being repeated over and over and over and over again? Unclean. 12 years. 12 years she was considered unclean. The community wanted nothing to do with her. If her family stayed with her, and we don't know if the family did, if the family stuck with her, she would have to have her own place in the house. She couldn't sit at the table with them and eat. If she was married, that marriage was basically over for 12 years. She could not be part of the synagogue. The synagogue, we don't have an equivalent of a synagogue in today's society. The synagogue was what, if you were in the synagogue, you were good. If you were kicked out of the synagogue, you were bad. You had no hope. It would be kind of like, I don't know if any of you came from really, really small towns. A very, very small town that had one church. And if you got excommunicated from that one church, wow. Everybody would say, there's something wrong with that person. And so that's what she dealt with for 12 years. People did not want to be kicked out of the synagogue because that had an effect on their employment. If you were a business person, people probably would not go to your place of business because you've been kicked out of the synagogue. You couldn't establish a line of credit because obviously there's something, you have a moral flaw if you're kicked out of the synagogue. In fact, if you go to John chapter 9, you remember the story of the blind man that had been healed? He'd been blind from birth, and the Jews wanted to disprove the fact that Jesus did it. And so they called in his parents, and they tried to get his parents to kind of stand with them against Jesus. So John chapter 9, verse 18 to 22, their son, who had been blind for 40 years, was given sight by Jesus. And John chapter 9, verse 18 says, the Jews still did not believe they'd been blind. He had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Is this your son, they asked. Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that he now can see? Well, we know he's our son, said the parents. And we know he's born blind. But how he can see, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's old enough. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. They were Jewish. They were afraid of the Jews, for already the Jews had decided that anyone who was acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. The parents were terrified of being put out of the synagogue. So, if you're told something for 12 years, chances are you believe it. If you're told you're stupid, 12 years, chances are you believe you're stupid. If you're told you're ugly every day of your life for 12 years, chances are you believe you're ugly. If you're told you're worthless every day of your life for 12 years, chances are you're going to believe you're worthless. If you want, Marilyn, the little ones are in that back room with Alejandra. Yeah. That's just a little aside. Parents, if you tell your kids something, they're going to believe it because you're their parent. If a mother says to the child, you're wonderful, the child's going to believe they're wonderful. The parent tells the child, you're bad, the child's going to think they're bad. They're going to act bad. And so this woman was told something for 12 years, and that's why she she could not come to Jesus face to face because he was a religious man. And so she knew he would reject her, but she also knew that he was her only hope. That's what's called a dilemma. The only one who can help you is the one who's going to reject you. What do you do? Well, she came up with a plan. She's going to sneak around behind him, and she's going to touch his cloak. And maybe, just touching his cloak can do what the doctors couldn't do and stop the blood. And so she did that. And Jesus knows everything, right? He knows who it is that touched him, but he has another purpose in mind. He says, well, who touched me? He knows who it was. Who touched me? And they said, well, come on, Jesus, there's people all over you. Could have been any. No, who touched me? I felt power leave me. Who was it? He's got a plan. Because he knows that woman has two healings. The body and restoration to society. And the only way she can be restored to society is if society sees that she's been cleansed. And so he insists, and finally she says, it was me. I'm the one that did it. Are you going to, it was me. And he says in go back to Mark, he says an amazing thing. In Mark chapter 5, verse 34, he said to her, daughter. He doesn't call everybody daughter. He says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. This is the woman. The woman is the caterpillar. Crawling for 12 years. Jesus knows there's something beautiful in that caterpillar. And Jesus wants to bring that out. And so Jesus insists that that lady take a stand and say, it was you, Jesus. And Jesus says, you're healed, daughter. You're no longer a caterpillar, daughter. You're a butterfly. You go, girl. You're a butterfly. You lift your head up high. No more looking at the ground. No more trying to go behind things. No longer accepting people calling you names, wondering what you did wrong. You are the daughter of the living God. Amen. Amen. Jesus has another purpose. Because at the same time this was going on, somebody was watching. Who was the other person in the story? Jairus. Remember? He's the one whose daughter was dying. He's the one who started the whole thing. Why? Who was Jairus? He was the leader of the synagogue. The synagogue that had kept this woman being a caterpillar for 12 years. Jesus is saying, look, Jairus, before I deal with your need, you're going to have to accept who this woman is. She's not a caterpillar. She's a butterfly. She's my daughter. You want me to heal your daughter? You better respect my daughter. You see how all this happening at one time? God's timing is so perfect. You want me to heal your daughter? You respect and restore my daughter. I was going over this sermon, this is how God works. I was going over this sermon on Tuesday in the car. And I was practicing it, and I was thinking, what this shows is how, well, let's do this. What does the number 80,000 refer to? I heard this number 80,000 on the radio. You pick which one you think it refers to. Does it refer to the number of people you interact with in a lifetime? 80,000. Does it refer to the number of hairs on your head? 80,000. Does it refer to the number of words spoken in a week? 80,000. Does it refer to your calorie intake for a month? 80,000. Does it refer to the number of hours watching TV in a lifetime? 80,000. Who thinks they... Just take a guess. Who wants to take a guess? 7.
B.
B. Number of hairs on your head. Carla.
E.
E. Number of hours watching TV in a lifetime.
A.
John. The answer is A. I was listening to the radio, and there was a public service announcement about people who consider suicide. And one of the reasons they consider suicide is because they feel that their life is meaningless. And they said, you know that in a lifetime, statistics show that you will touch about 80,000 people. Family, friends, people at work, people you went to school with, people you smiled at, people you shook hands with, people you hugged, people who came to you for advice, people you went to for advice, people you prayed with, people who prayed for you, people who know you, people who heard about you. And the point is, your life's not your own. You are so much more than one individual. And what happens to you impacts so many more people. And that's what Jesus was doing here. He was taking this one woman who'd been unclean for 12 years, who basically was an outcast by her own family and her own community, and he was taking that one woman and using her to reach out and change an entire community. You ever drop a stone in the pond and see the ripple? That's what your life is like. That's what your life is like. You're the stone being dropped, and you just go out and out and out. And you won't even know the people you're touching. You won't even know the people that you're influencing. When you get to heaven, you will. And so, brothers and sisters, this impacts how you pray. Your life's not your own. So when you pray, see, when Jesus is a perfect example of this. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he prayed that the cup could be taken from him, it wasn't because his life was going way, way out. By going through with it, he was influencing, in his case, not 80,000. In his case, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. In 2,000 years, easily billions of people. And so when you pray, that's why you have to say, not my will, but your will be done, Father, because my life's not my own. I'm more than this. And you are using me to influence and impact people in ways I will never, ever know about. But that's what faith is. Faith is belief in things unseen. I don't know how you're using my life. I don't know how you're going to use this situation I'm in, this situation that I'm praying about, but I turn it over to you. That's what you did when you put it on the altar. I'm turning it over to you. Amen. This woman had no idea that her restoration was going to change how an entire community and an entire church would look at her and others in her situation from then on. And so, brothers and sisters, you don't know how God's going to use you and your situation to impact and influence other people.
Amen.
We heard a song this week that we're going to play after this. We'll sing it. It's a new song, but it's easy to sing. It's called In the Name of Jesus. In Jesus' name. That's what this woman must have felt like. Can you imagine after 12 years to suddenly be able to look people in the eye? Can you imagine after 12 years to be able to go home and eat at the table with your family? And if your husband was still with you, to be able to share the bed with your husband? Can you imagine what that must have been like? To the people who were whispering about you, you could say, what are you talking about? What are you whispering about? Here I am, tell me. You want to talk about me? Talk about me, I'm right here. That's what I'm saying. When her friends who stuck with her, and they saw her restoration, and they heard Jesus call her daughter, and they heard Jesus say, go in peace. I'm sure some of them, if they would have said it back, if they had the phrase back then, would say, you go, girl. 12 years. You go, girl. You look them in the eye. You go to that synagogue. Take your place at that synagogue. Because you're the daughter of Jesus. So we're going to rise and sing the song that probably was how she was feeling.